podcasting seems like a romantic idea. And it also seems like a big, huge, nebulous thing. Like, what kind of tech should I have? How do I do it? How do I get it to Apple Podcasts and Spotify? And, there's all these questions. It's kind of this nebulous thing of the underneath the word podcast or surrounding it.
Welcome to the Smart Talk series, the show for professionals who want strategies, tips, and real talk about all things PR, marketing, and social media. Your host is Melissa Vella-Williamson, an award-winning, accredited, and nationally recognized PR pro and communication thought leader. And now your host, Melissa Vella-Williamson.
Hello and welcome to the Smart Talk series. I'm Melissa Vella-Williamson. This season, our focus has been on communication specialties. I typically end each season with a solo cast of me discussing my final point on our theme, but today we have a special surprise. I'm bringing my podcast producer, Jennifer Navarrete, to join me on the mic. Jennifer Navarrete has been podcasting since 2005 and believes everyone has a story to share and that podcasting is the perfect platform to share it. Whether she's founding an annual podcasting movement like National Podcast Post Month, leading communities like San Antonio Podcasters, Social Media Club, Social Media Breakfast, or training agencies and individuals through her company Brewing Media, Jennifer educates and empowers us to tell our story through podcasting. Hey there, Jennifer.
Hey, Melissa. Very excited to be on the other side of the mic.
I'm so happy you're here, y'all. You wouldn't know how much cajoling I had to do. I'm like, Jennifer, please join us. I really wanted to share your story with everyone and also give you all the honor and credit you deserve for helping us even make the Smart Talk series possible.
It's been a real privilege to do this with you. And I have to say that for me, as someone who's been in this space for such a long time, to help others join the space, to be part of this conversation, to really share their mission and their message is such a joy. And it is something that I thrive on. And I really, really just want more folks to know that podcasting is for them.
Yeah, it's been incredible to kind of watch your journey. I know. And you should silence your phone.
Yes, I am so sorry. I thought I am the worst guest ever, right?
We should leave this in. We're going to leave this in because we have to tell you all, right? PR pro and podcaster pro over here. Like cobbler's children have no shoes. I emailed her this morning and was like, I need your bio and information, your guest form, please. And then I forgot and I ate a banana, which you're not supposed to do before you do any kind of great voice work and whatnot. So we're a hot mess, but we're here.
That's
right.
That's
all that matters.
Absolutely.
So tell us about your background and what you're up to today in podcasting.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting thing to look back and go, I've been in podcasting for 16 years. And it all started because in the summer of 2005, I heard about this thing called podcasting. And I was like, that sounds interesting. Let me do a little digging into that. And I realized what it was. I was like, okay, you mean I can record something, put it up on the web, and no one can stop me? And I was like, sign me up. And nowadays that seems a no-brainer, right? Because everybody can do that. But back in 2005, that was revolutionary. It wasn't done. If you wanted to have your audio for other people to consume, you needed to be on the radio. If you wanted to have a video where people could see you, you needed to be on television. Video and audio and blogging, all those things were new, and it was called new media back then. Now it's just, social media and online media. It was very different. It was a higher lift to get into it because it was very techie geeky. It's gotten easier, and I'm super grateful that there's so many more tools that we have now than we did back then. But I just looked at that and thought, this is amazing. And I'm someone who likes to do the learn, share, grow aspect of things. When I learn something and I find that it's effective, I'll share what I've learned. And in that way, we all grow together. And that has been kind of like the way that I do everything that I do. I'm constantly investigating new things. And of course, nowadays, podcasting now has a sister, and it's called social audio, which is really popular, things like Clubhouse and Twitter Spaces. And I'm constantly looking at the next thing, playing around with it and going, is this something that's effective for me as a businesswoman? Is this something that could be effective for my clients? Is it something that could be effective for others? And in that way, that's kind of like that community aspect of myself that's constantly trying to lift us all up.
Yeah, I agree. You definitely have a teacher's heart. And I know when we first started working together, I told you a story about how when my daughter was young, she was really into Disney's version of Tinkerbell. And I said, if you watch that movie, they identify each type of fairy, and there are tinkerers, and there are people who like to get in and learn how something works and make a better version. And that definitely reminds me of you. And you've really evolved, I think, the industry and our understanding of it in your tinkering. So thanks for that. But you've been working in this space for 16 years now. So, what really have you seen in all that time?
It has evolved and in the best way possible because 16 years ago, it was just a bunch of early adopter geeks and there was very limited ways to do it. I mean, it was just so limited and it was a high lift. You needed to have a software and you needed to have a microphone and you needed to like ID3 tags and all these things that were like terminology that I didn't understand. And it was very new. And I'm grateful for the online community. There was a small group of podcasters online. And if I look back, we look at the Podfather, right? Adam Curry, who co-invented podcasting along with Dave Weiner. He had a show called The Daily Source Code. And that was kind of like our show where we were learning about not only podcasting as a platform, but also one another. And I think that community aspect really cemented itself where this was important. You needed to develop a community. And you mentioned in the intro that I launched the San Antonio Podcasters. Well, I created that group because in San Antonio, I was the only podcaster I knew in San Antonio. I knew people online, but I wanted to develop a community and have people I could meet face to face so we could kind of talk shop and compare notes. And so I created a meetup group. And, at the beginning, it was a meetup group of one. And the very first meetup that we had, it was like 3 people, me and 2 other people. And I was like, yay. And eventually it grew to where we had a really robust community and we wound up having live events around podcasting and social media and, really helped grow the community in San Antonio. But it started just with that one idea that I could record something, put it up on the web and no one could stop me. That is still true to this day. It's even more so now because now it's more common, more mainstream. And I think a lot of times folks think, oh, well, there's so much out there already. What do I have to add to it? And the reality is that we all have a unique spice and flavor and you have a mission and a message and you should absolutely get it out there no matter who else is out there.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I think that I have to remind myself of that even individually, like, well, my take and my experience and my point of view could help someone else. And it is special and worthy of sharing just by itself. So I really appreciate that you're doing that for the community. When we look at podcasting, we can look at this at the individual pro level as communicators or think about our clients or organizations. But in all we have in front of us today, why should professionals really consider podcasting either for themselves or their organizations that they serve?
I think back to when we were in elementary school and we learned how to learn, right? We figured out, were we a hands-on learner? Or did we need to see something? How did we learn? Did we need to hear it? And that doesn't change because we're grown up. We have content consumption preferences. Some folks prefer a blog post. Other people prefer video. Some people prefer audio. And mostly folks probably have a mix of all 3. But those are probably the main ways that people consume online content. So if you're someone who's a blogger and you're like, blogging is my thing and this is what I'm going to do, you're potentially leaving out 2/3 of your audience. Let's say that the audience is equal into those 3. So it's a really good idea to salt and pepper your content across these other platforms so that you're not limiting your audience, because people who prefer not to read and would rather listen to your message and people who would rather watch your message, they could be impacted just as much as the people who read your blog post. But if you're not putting your content in that space, then they don't know you exist. They don't know your mission exists. They don't know your message exists, and they cannot be part of your community. They cannot be potential clients. They can't drive things for you. So I would say that when you're looking at creating content, you really have to look at the whole aspect of content, that it's not just one way, just because maybe that's your preferred way, that you have to think about how everyone else likes to consume content and then create content for it. The great thing about audio is that it can go to YouTube, but you don't have to be on video. You can just make an audiogram and put it up there and people will search for it and they will listen to it. And it's a fascinating thing to me because that wasn't always the case, but it is definitely the case now.
Yeah, I remember when you brought that up about us putting episodes on YouTube. I'm like, why would people go to YouTube for a podcast? And I think it's pretty interesting these days how some people are going to YouTube as like, what is it? Like the number 2 search engine, right? It's either Google or YouTube. And I just find that really interesting. Like you said, that they are listening to things there versus just watching.
Yeah. I mean, Edison Research came out with a report and they said that YouTube was like about number 3. And so we're looking at Apple, Spotify, and YouTube, and mixed with Google Podcasts there. That's pretty big considering that Apple pioneered this kind of space as far as directory and aggregators and that kind of thing. that YouTube is up there. And I actually have spoken to quite a few people who are like, yeah, I'll do a search because I use YouTube as my search, and then I'll find something and I'll put it on a tab in the background while I'm working on my computer, or I'll put it on my phone while I'm taking a walk. And that is where they go. They don't go to Apple Podcasts. They don't go to Spotify. They don't go to Google Podcasts. They don't go to any number of other podcast players. They go to YouTube. That is their place, whether it's a video or whether it's audio. So think about, if you don't do that, you are definitely limiting your audience. And I think the fear factor for a lot of folks with YouTube is that, well, I don't really want to do video, or I'm not really comfortable with that. It's like, great, you don't have to be. Your audio, your mission and your message can be there, and just have, your album art, or you can always put little chapter art and, make it a little bit interactive, but people want to hear what you have to say. So make sure that they can find it.
It's an interesting medium because I have that feeling of intimacy and that share of ear with listeners, right? And we feel like we're having that conversation directly with them. But at the same time, I don't feel that lack of privacy, even when we started putting the episodes on YouTube, knowing that I could use the album art, for example. And it really doesn't matter. You're right. Sometimes I need to watch a video on YouTube and I am taking a walk and I don't have time to actually look at the talking head. So that's a really good point that you bring up, is that there's a way to get your audio and your episodes over there on YouTube without worrying about the actual visuals around it, because that's just a lot of pressure for a pro. Like if we are doing this episode and we're on Zoom and have to look perfect and sound perfect, that's a lot of pressure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say, I think we have to give ourselves permission to do these things, because a lot of times what will happen is that we'll look at other professionals in the space who are doing like a traditional YouTube channel, and we think, oh, we have to do that. No, you don't. You do not have to do that. The key is to get your mission and your message out there, and whatever form that takes, it's great. And the fact that people love to listen to podcasts on a video platform, I think, is phenomenal. So why not lean into that?
Right. And there's ways to lean into that, like you said, without having to have all the audio visual production going at the same time. Absolutely. Well, what are some things? I mean, there's a lot to consider before you start a podcast, but what are some of the main things professionals should consider before they start one?
Podcasting seems like a romantic idea. And it also seems like a big, huge, nebulous thing. Like, what kind of tech should I have? How do I do it? How do I get it to Apple Podcasts and Spotify? And, there's all these questions. It's kind of this nebulous thing of the underneath the word podcast or surrounding it. So what I like to do is I like to break it down. And I give folks the 4 levels of podcasting. Level 1 is mobile plus apps, right? And this is the simplification of podcasting, which I absolutely love. I mean, your mobile phone is the production studio in your pocket. You're ready to roll from the get-go. Find an app that you like, and there's a lot of them out there. Download it, go, record your mission and your message, get it out the door. Simple, easy, good to go. Now, what I will say is that when it comes to recording, that your environment is equally as important as the platform that you're using, as the tools that you're using. So be mindful of your environment. If you're in a large room with high ceilings and tile floor and hard surfaces, you're going to sound like you're in a room like that. It's going to sound very thin and echoey. So I would recommend that if you're going to go with your mobile phone and you have a walk-in closet, record in your walk-in closet or record in a guest bedroom, because it's got softer surfaces to absorb the sound. And that can really go a long way to improving your quality, because there's a little intimidation factor where, like, I'm doing a podcast, but I'm doing it on my phone, and you kind of feel small because you don't have this big, huge studio, and you see podcasters with the headphones and the mic and all that cool stuff. And you're like, oh, I don't have that. So maybe I'm not a real podcaster. And I want to just tell you, nope, you're a podcaster. Do you have a phone? Do you have an app? Are you using a podcasting app? Great. Do you have RSS feed? Awesome. Then guess what? You're a podcaster. And don't feel intimidated by that, but you can do little things to improve your quality of your sound. And then I'll say that level 2 is where you've got some sort of USB mic. It's plugged into your laptop. You've got some kind of software, or you're using some kind of online tool, because nowadays there's these amazing online tools that you can use to record your podcast. It's phenomenal. Matter of fact, you and I are recording this online using an online tool.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, I don't have to worry about my makeup and my face. It's great.
No, it's audio only, and it's built for this kind of thing. So it has the way to enhance the quality of the audio, knowing that everyone's in a different environment. So it's really good. And then level 3 is where you're like, I am all into this podcasting thing. I am totally going to build a studio. And so, yeah, you go to do the heavy lifting and you buy all the things and you have like a real dedicated studio. And that's great. And then level 4 is where typically I will find most folks who are new to the space. They'll either start at a level 1 or a level 4, because level 2 and level 3 is a little bit techie geeky, right? You need to know what kind of mic should you get, condenser, dynamic, what kind of software should you use, online, or should you download something on your computer? And how do I learn to edit? And how do I do? There's a lot of that. And so level 1 and level 4 kind of removes that, because level 4 is where you have a mission and a message, but you don't want to learn all the techie geeky stuff, nor do you want to do it on your phone. You want to rely on professionals. And so what you do is you work with a podcast producer, and they're the ones with all the tools and all the tech and all the knowledge, but you're the one who shows up with your script. You're the one who shows up with your guests, and you're the one who gets your message out there. And then you walk away and your podcast producer does all the heavy lifting to make sure everything gets out the door. And I feel like if most folks understood those 4 levels, it simplifies things. Now it's not this nebulous thing of podcasting. You can identify which one you're comfortable with. And once you identify which one you're comfortable with, then you just go deep into that one instead of it being all these things that you feel like you have to consider.
Yeah, I like that. And I think, to be transparent, I have like level 2 equipment and a level 4 producer support, because as we were building this podcast show, we were thinking through, okay, what is sustainable? And that is so important for professionals to think about, like not doing something quick and flashy and then it dies out. But especially if you're a PR pro, you want something that will grow over time. So you can start at level 1 and level up, right? With a growing audience and with interest in financing and eventually sponsors, whatnot, right? You can level on up. But I think that it's been a great use of my investment and resources to work with a professional like you to help me do it the right way from the beginning. Mm-hmm. And something that's smaller and strategic that can grow over time. And we don't have to kind of force all that and then it die out.
So one of the things that we talk about is that what's the KPI, right? What's the key performance indicator for you for doing these kinds of things for anyone that I work with? We have to identify that, because starting a podcast, like I said, it's a romantic idea, but Melissa, it's work.
Yeah, a lot of work.
Yeah, a lot of work. And if you don't know what equals success, you can get lost in that. And then you'll pod fade and you'll be kind of like, well, that didn't really work for me, but it's because you didn't identify what equaled success and then shoot towards that target.
Right. And what are some average or traditional measures of success? I know you and I've discussed it. We can talk about that too. And because anecdotally, like those are really interesting. When I just had a conversation the other day with a colleague of mine, and she said, "Oh, and I meant to tell you, I listened to your podcast. I listened to every episode. I've really been enjoying them. I'm wondering where season 3 is." And that was really exciting, but sometimes you don't get that feedback. So what is a common KPI measurement?
I'll say that it probably ranges between what I'm about to share. People want brand awareness. Maybe they're new, or maybe they've been around, but now they want to expand their brand. And sometimes it's phase 1. Phase 1 is I want brand awareness, or phase 2 is that I want to become a leader in my industry, or, phase 3 is that I want to speak on stage, or I want to do these other things, or I want to turn my podcast into a book, which happens pretty commonly. And it's actually a great way to speak your book. Mm-hmm. You can interview all the people, the pros that you want to do, or share your thoughts and then condense it down and have an editor work on it. And then there's your body of work. It's a great way to do it. But those are kind of where we're looking at, is like, okay, what is it that you say that is success? And occasionally someone says, well, I need this to drive revenue. And it's like, great. That's not the phase 1. Typically, it's probably phase 2 or phase 3. And then we have to be real strategic on how we work towards that. Sometimes it's sponsorships. Sometimes it's ads. A lot of times it's more like strategic partnerships where people want to align themselves with you because you are speaking to their core audience. A really great example of that, the Her Money podcast was actually launched because the host, she's a radio person. She was given an ad read, a host read, and it was for a financial advisor. And she's like, well, this is a host read, and I don't know this financial advisor, nor do I really know that much about money, but I'd like to learn about money. And how about I counteroffer this potential sponsor? How about they sponsor the podcast that doesn't exist yet, and they co-host it with me, and it'll be called Her Money, and we'll teach women like me about money. Well, this sponsor was wise and took her up on it. And they just launched this whole thing. So from the very get-go, she launched with a sponsor. And I think a lot of times people think, oh, I have to start from 0, no listeners, and then I have to build it up to some number, 10,000, 25,000, 100,000 listeners, and then somebody will be interested in what I have to say. But the reality is you can actually launch out of the gate with someone if it makes sense for you. It could be that it doesn't, and that's okay too. But there's so many different options in that KPI that knowing what that is and what the goals are and identifying what that could be. And then that can shift, right? Because as you develop your podcast, things may move around, but always keeping an eye on that KPI. It's really important to have that insight. And I would guess that probably is still true for you, Melissa.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know as we were thinking about mine, like, well, how was I going to measure success? And it's been an interesting evolution. And it was interesting because it was during the pandemic when we launched, and it was, how do I go meet people when I can't physically go meet people? And then part of it was, with the podcasting, and there was great support, and I really enjoyed it. And I have been able to meet and work with different professionals, I didn't have the opportunity to connect with before. And so it's a different type of lead gen if you think of it that way too. And if nothing else, in your own mind, right? And that's really important as a professional, especially as an entrepreneur or a business owner, or even a leader in the field, is that you feel like you're growing and you are leveling up in your confidence within, because without that, it doesn't matter how good you are at anything else, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely feel like my ability to create content in some ways came back to life. And I am writing my own book. And some of it is inspired definitely on the topics that we're working through on the podcast, but just the connections and the feedback that I've gotten on the content we've been creating in the podcast and also online as well. So it's been a lot of fun and different types of measurement. And sometimes that relates a lot more to our purpose versus any kind of financial measurement. So that's really important too.
If you think about it, this is your audio calling card. You mentioned earlier that podcast, there's an intimacy to that, and you're absolutely right, because people jam those earbuds in or they put headphones on and you're whispering in their ear, right? You're as close as you can get to someone without physically being there. And that intimacy, I have a feeling that I know the podcasters that I listen to. I may never have met them in person, but I do feel like I know them because I've been listening to them for weeks, for months, for years.
Right.
And there's a real closeness there, and there's a real shortcut to connection.
Yeah. I mean, I guess we're all created that way, right? We heard our mothers before we ever saw them. So very intimate and very familiar form of connection for us. That's a great thing to think about. Well, so there's a lot to consider when we develop a podcast. And I know you get probably asked this question a lot, but is there a right length or style of podcasting?
I'll give another breakdown. And these breakdowns are, I think, really simplify things. The way that I look at it, that there's also 4 levels of podcasting. And it doesn't mean that they don't, interweave between themselves, but just as a general baseline. A micro podcast is under 5 minutes. So it's very short form, very structured. A nugget podcast, 5 to 10 minutes. And then a commuter podcast, 20 to 30 minutes. Although I know some folks kind of push back and go, my commute's an hour long. It's like, oh, okay. Well, maybe you listen to 2 episodes, but on general, right? 20 to 30 minutes.
There you go.
And then long form is 45 minutes plus. And the right length depends on what you have to say. And I'll share this. I listen to a podcast that comes out twice a week that is 3 hours long, and it's not long enough. I listen to a podcast that's anywhere between 9 to 12 minutes, and it's perfect. And I think it has to fit you. That range that I gave you is a general range, and people will quickly identify where they feel comfortable. They're like, well, I really want to do a 20 to 30 minute. It's like, okay, great. That's fantastic. Or I really want to do live. And so live lends itself to longer form. Okay, awesome. Or no, I really just want to do this. So that is part of this identifying thing. We have this mind map that I walk people through about how we're developing their show. And that's one of the considerations. And then once we narrow it down, then all those other considerations go away. And that's really the key. Is there are so many options, which is truly amazing. I mean, I am so thrilled that podcasting is mainstream and more people know about it and more people do it. But at the same time, because there's so many options, it can be really overwhelming. So identifying what the options that are right for you, and what's right for you is not for anybody else. So identifying what that is, then that forms and frames your show and makes such a big difference and really moves things forward.
Yeah, and I think I love this 4x4. We should make an infographic on that. 4x4. Choose your own adventure on that. The other thing I would say is thinking about your budget too and your own time constraints, right? Because even developing or producing a show that is more commuter like ours is going to take a certain amount of work. So that's part of that consideration as well. I know that I've thought about too, and then the budget to maintain that. And you're right. My husband got into podcasting, listening after I did, and really found, wow, this is a place where you can consume very tailored niche content, and really enjoys listening to wrestling podcasts. And some of those, they're 3 hours plus long. And he'll break it out throughout, a day, 2 days, whatever. I just can't imagine consuming anything that long. And that entertainment factor is big. And you're right. You have to think about yourself as a host that way too. Is, well, how much do I have to give? And how much of it is quality, right?
Well, and that really comes down to understanding your natural flow of your business. So if you're a communication professional, you know that your clientele has very busy seasons. And your business in and of itself has very busy seasons. So if you think that you're going to be doing a podcast once a week, 52 weeks out of the year, be mindful of what those considerations are of the busy seasons in your business, because a lot of times what happens, the first thing that's going to go is the podcast. And we set the expectation for our audience. If we tell them we're going to do a show once a week until all year long, and it drops on a Thursday morning, and all of a sudden it's not there, and then it's not there, and then it's not there, then there's a breaking of trust there, which is why I think it's really amazing that nowadays, back in the early days, there wasn't this thing called seasons or series. Now we have seasons and series, which models more along the lines of television. It makes great sense. I love this in so many ways because it allows us as professionals, busy professionals, entrepreneurs, to be able to look at our annual calendar and go, okay, for this month here, I'm working on this big, huge client project and I barely have time for sleeping and eating, let alone a podcast. So that's when I'm going to have a break. So I'm going to build my season or my series in here, 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 and here. And what is a season? Well, you get to decide. Is it a 4-part series? Is it a 6-part series? Is it a season of you do 2 seasons a year, you do 3 seasons a year, you do 1 a quarter? That's entirely up to you. All you're doing is setting the expectation for your audience and then meeting it.
Yeah, I think that accountability and predictability on both sides is really important. And that's a big part of why we thought about our strategy and our format so carefully. And that we do seasons for that reason. Because boy, if I came to y'all every week and the things you would hear, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're handling PR, particularly during the pandemic, it's not always roses and champagne. So,
Mm-hmm.
I need that time to focus on the business, focus on myself, on my family and whatnot, but be able to produce something of quality that was predictable and had a lot of nuggets within it, right? Even if it's commuters. So, well, great. This is a lot for us to think about.
Mm-hmm. We need to think of this as something that just becomes integrated with everything that we do. And I can go back to, for those of us of a certain age, I remember when email first became part of the workplace. And at the time, everyone in the office was grumbling like, what? We're busy as it is. We don't have time for this thing called email. But of course, what's email nowadays? It's just part of your natural business flow. And the same thing happened with social media. When social media first came out and people realized, oh, this isn't just for kids, this actually has a business application.
Mm-hmm.
So many of the folks, I would go do trainings in offices and go do all kinds of workshops, and people would be like, I don't have time for this. I'm already, like, my time is so committed right now. And I was like, look, I get it. But at some point, this is just going to be a natural part of your day. But until then, it is going to be like, stop the presses. I need to do this thing called social media. And this, by the same token, podcasting isn't going to be a natural flow in your day. It is going to be an interruption. It's going to be something you have to stop the presses. Let me do this thing called podcasting. But if you stick with it and you come up with your own schedule, which it is your schedule, and you have a team that can support you in this, then what happens is that it does become just a part of your flow. It becomes a part of your team's flow, and it just becomes something that is part of your business. And it's not a heavy lift, or it's not this stop the presses thing anymore. So I would say that if you want to give the time consideration, knowing that going in, it's going to be stop the presses because it's something new. You haven't done it. Your team hasn't done it. You're learning it. Hopefully you have a guide that can guide you through it, and you're figuring it all out. So yes, dedicate the time that it's going to take to get into that comfortable flow. But once you get to season 2 and season 3, it just becomes, okay, check, 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 check. Yes, go, go, go. And it becomes a lot easier. And having systems makes all the difference in the world.
Right. I need all the checklists and all the Google forms and all the all the double checks and triple checks. And that's been really helpful. Well, that's really important to consider. Thanks on that one. So do you have any other words of wisdom that you think it's important for us to consider?
I would say share your message. Do it.
Mm-hmm.
If you need permission from someone, I want you to go stand in front of the mirror and I want you to say, hi, my name is, insert your name here, and I'm a podcaster. And it's going to feel weird because you're not a podcaster yet, but you have to give yourself permission and identify yourself as a podcaster and then move forward. And each day, move that dial, move it, and just keep going and keep going. And that's how it goes. It just all of a sudden becomes part of your business. And eventually you'll be like Melissa.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're having that confidence issue, you can do like Mel Robbins' new book, The High Five. But it's literally like give yourself a high five in the mirror. And there's all this research that says that the neurons in your brain and whatnot, like feel better and get happier. So give yourself that high five and say, okay, I'm doing this. Let's keep going. And that's really it with a lot of these new initiatives and hard things, right? Is just take it one step at a time, find expert help and invest in that if you're serious about meeting your goal. And then once that hard lift is done, just maintain it. And that's what we're working to do, is grow and maintain all the good stuff we've already started. Well, Jennifer, you've heard me ask several guests this, so I'm really curious about your answer. But what does SMART Talk mean to you?
I think SMART Talk means believing in the mission that you were born with and believing in the message that you have to share with the world. And it feels intimidating because there's so many great messages out there from amazing people, and you feel like your voice is small, and who are you to add to the conversation? But you absolutely have something dynamic to share. It wouldn't be inside of you if it wasn't meant to be shared with the world. So I would say the SMART Talk is you believing in yourself and beginning to speak your mission, beginning to speak your message, beginning to share that with the world. And of course, you're going to know that I believe podcasting is one of the ways, and it's a great way to do it.
I love that. Oh my gosh. All the feels in my heart right now. That's great stuff. Well, I've really enjoyed our conversation, and I'm sure everyone's really excited to get to know you even better. But what's the best way for our listeners to connect with you directly?
I am known as E-Podcaster, the letter E, Podcaster, everywhere. If you just look me up on Twitter, you can go there, and they've got the one link to rule them all, and that'll take you to all my links. But you can look me up, jennifernavarrete.com. My company is brewing.media. I have a lot of podcasts out in the world, but I would recommend the easy way, because my last name is not necessarily easy to spell, would be to just look up E-Podcaster, and you're going to get all of me everywhere.
Well, thank you, Jennifer, so much for sharing your knowledge with us today and joining me for this very special podcast episode.
Well, I'm super excited to be again on the other side of the mic with you. It's a real pleasure.
And thank you to our listeners for joining us for today's episode. We love diving deep into communication topics to elevate our industry practice. If you're a fan of the show, please rate and review it so others can find us, or share the podcast or your favorite episode with colleagues. Your support means everything to us. And as always, think smart and communicate smart. And I'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Smart Talk series. If you learned something or enjoyed our conversation, share it on social media or send to a friend. To learn more about this and other communication topics, visit mvw360.com. That's mvw360.com.